Owning a boat comes with a number of perks, like being able to fling your favorite fishing rod around. And here's another perk. Geico's boat insurance covers your boat and your belongings. And with specialist support from agents that are as passionate about boating as you are, there's so much value that you'll want to high-five someone. But not while you're holding your fishing rod. That's a prized possession. So hold on tight with both hands and keep it covered through boat insurance. Get more with Geico.
This is Wheelbearings. I'm Dan Roth.
And I'm Sam Abu-Al-Samad.
So welcome to episode 31. We've got some interesting, momentous news about the Honda Accord, which means there's a new one. But there's some other stuff too. And first we'll start with what we're driving. And before I bore everyone to death with my slice of mediocrity, maybe. Anyway, we'll figure out what to call it. But Sam, you're driving the Mercedes-Benz GLA45.
I got the GLA45 right as we were recording the last show, so I hadn't, I'd just gotten it that day and hadn't had a chance to drive it yet, so I didn't talk about it. But it's a really interesting little car. It's the GLA, is Mercedes compact crossover technically.
Yeah, but that's like, it's funny that you call it a car because that's really what it is. It's a hot hatch.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, the dimensions, aside from the ride height, the dimensions are almost exactly the same as a Mazda 3. Same wheelbase, and for that matter, same as a whole bunch of C segment cars, like, the Honda Civic and the Mazda 3 and the Chevy Cruze. They're all that same size and same width, same length. The GLA, the normal GLA is actually set a little bit taller than the AMG version, obviously. And the AMG is pretty close to, something roughly akin to a Golf R or a Focus RS, which makes it very interesting. It's all-wheel drive. It's got a 2-liter turbocharged 4-cylinder engine that's really cranking it out. Since it's an AMG, 375 horsepower and 350 foot-pounds of torque.
And a bad attitude.
Yes.
I love the way that thing just snarls and pops and whatever.
Well, to do that, though, you have to put it in like Sport Plus or race mode. Or Sport, it'll do it a bit. And, whenever you start the thing, it defaults to comfort mode. And it doesn't really have that snarl and hiss. So you pretty much, you start it and then just twist the knob behind the shifter to get it into Sport Plus or race mode. And then, then it's all good to go.
Yeah, that becomes like your default action when you start it up because there's no point in driving it in comfort mode.
Well, yeah. And, the other thing, too, is that the engine is paired with a 7-speed dual clutch transmission. And, in comfort mode, it really feels kind of lazy. Particularly, launching from a standing start. You really have to give it a fair bit of gas to get it to go anywhere, to move either in reverse or in drive. And so, if you put it into Sport Plus, it picks up a lot quicker. It engages a lot quicker. Still, don't know that I'd necessarily call it wouldn't say it would necessarily be a great drag racer, but it'll run 0 to 60 in, they claim 4.3 seconds, and I believe that. I didn't actually measure it, but it felt like about that. And the one I had the matte silver paint finish on it, which looks really good. And really deeply bucketed seats. One complaint I had about it: very high belt line. So it feels like you're sitting in a bathtub. So that wasn't much fun. And then another thing about it is the AMG version, because of the bigger wheels and tires, it's running on 19-inch alloys with 235/45 wheels. It seems like it really restricts the turning angle of the front wheels, and so the turning circle is about 39 feet.
That's
for
awful.
A car with a 106-inch wheelbase is pretty bad. My wife and I went out to dinner, and I was, trying to maneuver it into a parking space in a parking garage in Ann Arbor. And, it took me a couple of tries to get it in just because I couldn't turn it sharp enough to get it to go in straight, and it was a fairly small area that I had to maneuver in. And, this is not a big car, but it just, it couldn't turn very tight, which, it's kind of disappointing.
Yeah, my S60s, my Volvos were like that as well. And it was, going from the rear wheel drive ones that could turn very tight. And I'm sure, rear wheel drive Mercedes is very similar because it's a European car designed for, that kind of city. You could get a lot of steering angle at it. A lot of front wheel drive cars, you just can't get much steering angle. So you have to do like a zillion point turn. Like a 39-foot turning circle is huge.
Well, yeah, like I said, and especially in a car that size.
Yeah, and that's what makes it even worse.
Yeah, that is kind of ridiculous. Because I think for a typical for a car that size, is closer to about 32 feet, 32 or 33 feet is more common. So yeah, it's definitely not particularly maneuverable in tight spaces, but out on the open road, it's very maneuverable.
Yeah, it rides and handles really well.
Yeah, it's not too stiff. So you can drive it, in pretty much anything. And one of the interesting things that I've taken to doing recently with cars like this, went back when I had the Focus RS a couple of months ago. One of the things I complained about was, on some stretches of highway around here, where it's got these long, slow waves, in the concrete pavement, and the Focuses, get into this bouncy vertical motion on those sections of road. And the GLA had no issue at all with that. It just, cruised right over it, even though it felt like it was a stiffer suspension setup than the RS. It still had no issues at all. With that, it handled it much, much better than the Focus does.
How does it stack up against stuff like the Golf R that you mentioned in the Focus RS? Otherwise, I mean, I know it's more expensive, and it's sort of in a different place.
More expensive.
Yeah, it's a ridiculously priced car. So like, it does offer something unique in that it's got that AMG mystique. It's certainly seems a little quicker, but what else do you get with this car that you would be missing out on with sort of its competitors that we've identified?
Well, I haven't driven the current Golf R. It's been a while since I drove a previous generation Golf R, but certainly, compared to the Focus, I think the interior is much nicer. Of course, Mercedes, doesn't offer a manual transmission, so you get the DCT. And you do get paddle shifters, which are, very responsive. But, with the Focus is manual only, as is the new Civic Type R. It's also manual transmission only. So you don't have that option in this one. But, in terms of, overall refinement in the interior, the fit and, the materials and everything, it does feel more expensive, in keeping with its price tag that starts at 51 grand. And the one I drove, I think was close to 60. Yeah. Whereas, a Focus RS, starts at about 35 or 36. And you can get it to around 40, low 40s, if you tick off every option in the book. The seats, in both of them are really good. The Focus has got Recaros. I'm not sure who makes the seats for the Mercedes, but they're similarly deeply bucketed. They'll hold you in place. You're not going to be squirming around. You don't have to worry about where your backside is. When you're cornering hard, you're going to be held in place securely. Aside from the maneuverability issue in tight spaces, there and the price, there really aren't any compromises in this one. So, I think, like I say, I mean, it certainly has a feel that is more akin to its price tag, but, and for me, at least, because of some of the roads I drive on, I thought it drove better. I wouldn't necessarily say the performance is dramatically better. It's a little bit quicker. It's got a little more power, 375 versus 350 in the Focus. and the Civic Type R is 307. So it's I think you're to a degree you're getting you're paying more, but you're getting more for your dollar.
Yeah, I'm just I'm kind of curious.
It's worth $60,000. I don't
right.
I don't know that I'd pay $60,000 for this car, but it is what it is.
Somebody will, and
yeah. Oh yeah.
I mean, honestly, that's the only GLA that's worth considering, because the GLA 250 is so bland and boring and wimpy and weird. It's just not a car that I don't know. I would never consider it.
There's also another option as well. Mercedes did a deal with Nissan a few years ago to do some platform and engine sharing, and so the Infiniti QX30 is basically a reskinned version of the GLA, and the QX30 is actually really nice. I actually really like. I think I prefer the styling of the Infiniti, and it has the same engines in there. And I actually, when I drove the QX30 last summer, I was really impressed with it. I liked it a lot, especially with the turbo engine. The QX30 Sport.
I think that's A, that's an interesting wrinkle, and B, I think that's actually, I agree with you. Infiniti styling is across the board. It's actually really good. And that one of the things I don't like about the GLA is how just crappy it looks, unless it's the AMG. So I know that's opinion, but that's my opinion.
Well, they did refresh it for 2018. It does. The 2018 model does look a little better. It looks a little more aggressive, even in its base form than it did before. So it doesn't look, it's a little less bland than it was before. So I think it might be worth another look.
Well, all right. I'll take another look at it on the website, and I'll still probably do the sharp intake of breath when I look at the prices. And
I mean, it's a Mercedes.
Yeah, I know.
That goes with the territory.
Yeah. So let's move on then to.
Yeah. What did you have?
I had
you had a couple of crossovers too, didn't you?
I had some crossover ish. So I have one kind of compact crossover and one all-wheel drive hatchback. So I thought it was an interesting thought experiment this week. This week I'm driving the Mitsubishi Outlander Sport. It's an LE and it's a special edition, whatever that means. And last week I touched on it briefly. I had the Subaru Impreza 2.0i Premium. So they're not exactly sort of complete analogs for each other. I think if it were like the Crosstrek, then they'd be sort of perfect competitors. But the Impreza does a decent stand-in, and they both cost about $24,000. They both have 2-liter engines. They're both all-wheel drive. They really do play in pretty much the same end of the market. And it's interesting because they're not luxury. They're not sport. They're all-arounders. So these cars have to fill so many roles that it can often mean that they don't excel at any single one. It's kind of a recipe for mediocrity because it has to be all things to all of the people that are buying them. So to look at these two cars one right after the other, I was like, okay, well, on the plus side, the Subaru has an all new platform that feels, it's much more solid than the outgoing car, as Subaru says, and you feel that from behind the wheel, and it certainly feels more solid than the Outlander. But on the other hand, the Outlander looks better, I think. Styling is certainly subjective, but I'm not in love with the new Impreza styling, which looks like the old Impreza styling. So A to Subaru.
When's the last time you said a Mitsubishi looks better than X? If you step back from, because it's easy to hate Mitsubishi, right? It's easy to just throw insults their way. And for a variety of reasons, they deserve some of the shade, but also like the Outlander Sport is the best selling Mitsubishi, and I can see why. Most of their stuff is not terribly styled. This one is especially well done. It's tidy.
on its wheelbase, and it has a bit of a rake to its stance. Maybe that's just with the styling, because there's this descending character line in the door that sort of rakes it forward. And
I don't disagree with you. I think the Outlander Sport is definitely the best looking vehicle that Mitsubishi's made in a long time.
Yeah, and it, you give up something for that. The Subaru. What surprised me the most was the Outlander Sport and the Subaru both sit on a 105-inch wheelbase. It's like the Outlander Sport is 105.1, or one of them is a tenth of an inch longer than the other. I was astounded by that because the Impreza looks so much longer. It looks like it's stretched over a long wheelbase, and part of that is because it's lower. So maybe the Crosstrek will look a little stubbier, and also the profile. The roofline of the Outlander Sport, it's got like a little bit of almost like a camback or a reverse camback. So the roof is shorter. And the Subaru has more interior space. It got, the materials wise, that's a wash. Tech wise, that's a wash. So like overall, I think, not to super belabor the point, but, the Impreza is all new and it's a better value at $24,000. It had stuff like the eyesight system, which is now in its second generation, and it's much more capable. It still doesn't fully do like stop and go, like Q control, but it will come all the way to a full stop, and then you do have to put your foot on the brake, or you'll just like idle into the car in front of you. But that system, because that one's really interesting because it's not like radar sensors, it's camera based.
Right. It's a stereoscopic camera system. So it uses two cameras to do the range finding instead of using radar. Yeah. It's one of the few on the market that does that.
It works really well. And it's, now you're getting that in a $24,000 car. It's got, the, lane keeping system, which is now, that's also new. And I was playing with that, where if you go over like a solid yellow on the side of the road, it'll actually nudge the car back towards its lane. And it's gentle, and I shut it off normally, but you have to play with these things too, and they are getting much better. And I think that one of Subaru's positions, they've decided to move into that area of the market that, like the lower priced Volvos and Mercedes cars, they just don't exist anymore in this market. They're not around. But people still want a relatively affordable car that is, it doesn't need to be super luxurious, but they want a car with a good reputation for durability and safety, and it can handle your lifestyle. Well, I feel like the Impreza wins in this Outlander versus Impreza shootout. It's a newer platform. It drives better. It's, efficiency is probably a little bit higher, although neither car is super inefficient. They have a 2-liter 4-cylinder. They do what they do. They both have CVTs. Both suck. Subaru CVT is a little better. And yeah, it's a solid car that will do everything you need it to do. It's not a car you're going to love. Like, if you want to love it, get a WRX, and that'll be a lot more entertaining. So it was instructive.
I think, probably the majority of people buying a Subaru probably will love, even the base Impreza. The enthusiasts probably won't love it, as you said. And they're the ones that would want a WRX. But I think, average consumers would probably be thrilled with something like this car.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. I think that they'll love it for different reasons, right? They'll love it because it does have that lane keeping system and the eyesight and the blind spot detection stuff integrated nicely. It's got a new infotainment system that's better. And the Mitsubishi has a new infotainment system that's also better. That's kind of about a wash. They're still, lagging the industry leaders, but they're not as frustrating to use as they had been. So that's a plus. Neither car had nav. Both cars have really easy to use climate controls. It was to me, it's like all the car you need, and that's like a super practical way to come at it, I suppose. But you look around and you go, okay, so this is a car, you spend $24,000 on it. This car is going to last for 2 decades if you just maintain it. It is like all the car most people need. We get caught up in the emotional decisions and we buy more car, but it's nice to see that there's still a lot of value to be had under $30,000, because every now and then I start to fret that it's really hard to buy an affordable car, and we can argue about how affordable $24,000 is, but
and that that is a very serious concern. Affordability is a serious concern, and that's why we're seeing more and more cars being financed on longer and longer loan terms. A lot of people getting 72 and 84-month loans, which is a problem. Because I think we talked a little bit about this last week. I went to this event where some folks from Cox Automotive presented a whole bunch of data, because they do a lot of work with a lot of dealers, both on the new and the used side, and they collect a lot of data on vehicle transactions. And so, what they've seen, from the data is, over time, the average payments have stayed relatively steady. So the average payment is, in the $400 to $450 a month range, but the number of payments you have to make on that car have gone up steadily, from 4 years to 5 to 6 to 7. So, that's kind of crazy for buying a car.
Well, I mean, luckily the cars last longer too, but there's still that fundamental issue where, you're buying that car, and a lot of times now, I think luxury features have become a lot more popular. That's a double-edged sword. You've filled your car with, power seats and other stuff that can have problems. And if you're spending sort of X amount and you can't really afford much more for upkeep, you've boxed yourself in where you've got this expensive car that you're paying for a very long time, and you can afford the payment, but you can't really afford ownership. You can buy it, but you can't afford it. It's two different things.
Well, fortunately, that's the other thing with new cars. For the most part, they actually don't require a whole lot of maintenance anymore. Other than the wear items like tires and brake pads and wipers, but and just oil changes. It's not like you got to take the car in for a tune-up every 3 or 6 months. All of that stuff. Everything will run for 100,000 miles or more without ever really looking at it.
Yeah, I mean that's true. The stuff, we're very spoiled now. It's pretty good. I just recall being astounded when one of my friends, this was back in the late 90s, he bought a Plymouth Breeze. And we were all just like, you're married to that thing for 7 years. We'd never heard of like a loan that long, and for a car like that, it wasn't a terrible car at the time, but it wasn't something that any of us.
I mean, I had a Stratus, and it was the same car. It was a rebadged version of the same car. It was actually a really nice car. It was roomy, and it actually handled surprisingly well, especially if you got one of the 6, I think, or 6 or 7 that were built with a manual transmission.
Late 90s Chrysler was great. Those cars all rusted away, I think, before they wound up out of their loans, but that's a separate story. But it was just one of those things, like you're gonna have this for a long time, and now we have a separate issue where there's a lot of student debt and stuff too, so we're a little off the point here. That I was trying to make, and I'm writing this up for Forbes, so look for that sometime soon. But the Outlander is surprisingly solid still. It's a solid entry. I can see why it sells so many. There's no shame in purchasing it, but I think that in the market, like even just between it and the Subaru is a much better product, and it's a lot newer. It drives a lot newer. Neither felt real comfortable at anything beyond about 7/10, and it's the electric power steering in both is weird, and you don't really have much of a sense of what's going on at the tires, and it's a CVT, so that's unrewarding, and the 2-liter engines are kind of soft. They don't have that much oomph. I was also shocked to notice the Subaru has kind of lost its burble. And I don't know whether they went to equal length exhaust manifold runners or something, but yeah, it sounds like a 2-liter 4-cylinder now, like an inline engine. I liked that. I didn't miss the burble. But yeah, it's the newer cars, obviously, I think a little bit more evolved and it's better. And that's the one out of these two that wins. But the Mitsubishi, for as much as everybody jokes about it, it's solid enough. There's just a lot of competition too, not just between Mitsubishi and Subaru. There's a lot of other stuff in that end of the market that you could purchase. That, I mean, you're in a Golf at that point too, not an all-wheel drive Golf, but you've got to buy a performance Golf for that. But there's a lot of other cars you can pick, and they all sort of have their ups and downs. The combo of small engine, affordable price, and all-wheel drive, though, there's not too many. So
that's true.
I will stop rambling. I was actually surprised at how well the Mitsubishi did, just because that whole thing is old. That's like 10-plus-year-old hardware.
Yeah, I think 2008 was when the Outlander Sport debuted, and they did a very mild refresh this year that they launched at the Chicago Auto Show. But I mean, we're talking very mild.
Is the Eclipse going to replace this? So the new Eclipse is
the Eclipse Cross. I don't know. It's they haven't really said, so it's not clear exactly how those are going to fit into the lineup. I'm guessing they're going to keep both.
Wow, that's going to be, because everything I saw about the Eclipse,
I think the Eclipse Cross is actually slightly
smaller, larger,
slightly smaller.
Huh.
Yeah.
I hope it's not on this old platform.
No, it actually is on a new platform, from what I understand.
Yeah, Mitsubishi does, like, they're an underdog at this point, so I want to root for the underdog. But they've got some challenges where their stuff is very old, and you've got the Mirage is just like, it completely does not belong in this market. And so it becomes the butt of jokes. But that is a rest of world car. That car would be great in India, not here.
Yeah.
So and they're a big company, and I just don't know what they're doing, like why they're still hanging around if they're not going to get it together with product that fits this market.
Yeah, they definitely need stuff that's more competitive if they want to maintain a place over here.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's good. Let's pivot again. Okay. Speaking of stuff that is competitive, this week has been marked by a couple of announcements. The first, speaking of competitive cars, is the 2018 Honda Accord. It's here, and you actually went to the event, and you can talk about it now, right? It's not under embargo any longer?
Nope, no embargo. It was revealed today, as we're recording this on Friday night. It was revealed this morning here in Detroit, and it's literally all new. I mean, there's virtually no carryover parts. I mean, not even powertrains are carried over. Everything has been replaced. From a design perspective, it's very similar to the current Civic sedan. Same kind of fastback profile. Main difference, aside from being a little bit larger, is the front end. It's got a more vertical nose. Following a similar kind of theme to a lot of manufacturers these days. Going with a more flat-faced, blunt nose, which is kind of an interesting look. I think it works pretty well on this car. But overall, you can definitely see the resemblance to the Civic sedan, and for those 5% or so of Accord buyers over the last several years that have been opting for the 2-door version, you're just going to have to look elsewhere now, because there is no more Accord Coupe. This is with this fastback styling on this car, it takes over where the coupe was, but with 4 doors now.
Well, I mean, honestly, the coupe must not have really sold many at all.
Yeah, it was about 20,000 a year. So you're right.
That's more than I thought.
Very many. Yeah, I was actually surprised when I heard that from the folks at Honda. But yeah, it's been consistently selling, about 18 to 20,000 every year for the last several years, which, is not a lot, but, it's a notable amount. But it's, like all the other coupes, or most of the other coupes, it's now history, as sedans have all morphed into that coupe-like profile, where there's one continuous line going from the base of the windshield to the trailing edge of the car. The other thing, to note is really the classic 3-box sedan is kind of dead. I mean, there really aren't very many of them left anymore. All the 4-door sedans, even those that, most of them still have a trunk, but the trunk doesn't really, when you look at the car in profile, it's not really visible as a separate shape like it traditionally was. And I asked, about, whether they had given any thought to doing a hatchback version of the Accord, along the lines of what Buick is doing with the new Regal. And, they sounded like they weren't really very interested in that direction. And certainly, the last time that Honda tried something like that, with the Accord Cross Tour, back about 8 or 9 years ago, it was not a great success. But, then again, that car was also not really as stylish as some of the other more contemporary vehicles today.
Well, the Cross Tour had that issue of like, it was just that weird humpback look. It was a good idea.
It was taller, crossover, kind of ride height, very, a lot of utility, but it wasn't particularly attractive.
It rode really well. It was probably the best driving version of the Accord. It was expensive, and it was aimed at, I think they aimed it at empty nesters, which it was an odd idea, like in terms of where they positioned it. For this Accord, it was really interesting, that they introduced it in Detroit they had your event in Detroit. That, it's an American car.
They've done this last couple of product reveals for Honda as well. I mean, they launched the new Civic here, and they did the same in December with the Odyssey. So they like to come back to Detroit. And the thing is, a lot of these vehicles, most of the engineering has taken place here in the U.S. Down in Ohio and Marysville at Honda's North American R&D headquarters. So that's kind of out of the way. I mean, there's not many people there, so they tend to bring a lot of the Marysville developed vehicles up here for their launches. Because it's kind of relatively close to home for them, but where everybody else, where all the media are. And the other thing, even though they have dropped the coupe from the Accord lineup, what they have kept is manual transmissions. And in fact, they've even expanded availability of the manual transmissions in the sedans. So for 2018, there's going to be 3 engines available in the Accord. They've got the 1.5 liter turbo that's based on the one that's in the Civic and the CRV, a 2 liter turbo, which is based on the engine that's in the Civic Type R, but with a less powerful version of that. And both of them are available with manual transmissions. The 1.5 is available with a 6-speed manual or a CVT, like in the Civic and CRV. And then the 2 liter is available with a manual or Honda's new 10-speed automatic that just debuted in the Odyssey minivan. And then the third powertrain option is the return of their next generation hybrid. So the Accord Hybrid is going to be back again, launching early in 2018.
Well, and that's going to be interesting too, because the way they've designed it is it doesn't, the power unit, the batteries and stuff don't eat up trunk space or seat space.
It's got a more compact battery, lithium ion battery than before, and they've packaged it underneath the rear seat. So now the Accord Hybrid has exactly the same trunk volume as all the other Accords. So they're all just shy of 17 cubic feet. Which is pretty impressive.
So, go ahead.
Oh, no, just I was just going to say, overall, I mean, this thing's got a lot of interior room. I mean, the Accord for a long time has been, at least the four-door Accords have been very roomy cars, and that continues with this one. Overall, the cars, the exterior dimensions are all within an inch of where they were before. It's slightly shorter, slightly lower, slightly wider, but less than an inch difference in every dimension. The only notable difference is the wheelbase, which is now a little more than 2 inches longer. And most of that has gone into rear seat room. So there's plenty of space in this thing.
Yeah, it's longer and yet short. I mean, the wheelbase is longer. The overall length is shorter. So the wheels then, by nature, go out to the corners, opens up interior space. The trunk is larger as well. But one thing I've noticed about that swooping coupe-like roof line is
small openings.
Right. It makes it impossible to get at just you have a big trunk you can't use, or you can't.
Well, that's why I asked the question about, whether they had considered a hatchback, because, especially, since the Civic hatchback seems to be doing pretty well, it seems like it would make sense to go back and think about doing a hatchback again on the Accord, because, back in the first couple generations of the Accord in the 70s and 80s, they had a 4-door sedan and a 3-door hatchback. And, it'd be kind of cool to see them go back and, do it as a 5-door now, do a 5-door hatchback. Again, similar kind of layout to what Buick is doing on the Regal.
Yeah. Well, and, Honda they own some real estate in this space. It was really interesting to me to just take note of, it's such a mainstream car, and yet it sparks, water cooler chatter. People know what I do. And so occasionally they'll ask me about cars. Usually that's around like auto show season, and it's about the ridiculous stuff. Like I expected
in a minute.
Right. And I expected to be talking about, this week's ridiculousness, which is the Aston Martin Valkyrie. Instead, though, I was, fielding questions about like the new Accord, and like, oh, that looks really good. I really like the interior, which they've cleaned up a lot. There was one of the comments was, oh, they finally got rid of that 2-screen nonsense. I was like, yes,
yeah,
thank you. And, even
that was always a dubious design choice.
Yeah. And it also just like the infotainment system was just garbage too. So no matter how many screens it had, it was not good to use. It wasn't intuitive. It sounds like they brought back knobs on the,
yes, like the CRV and Odyssey. It has a rotary volume knob, and it also has a second knob for tuning the radio.
Yeah. This car comes at a time when the sedan is losing its prominence. So the ones that survive they're going to have to be either the very best or the very niche. And it looks like Honda is staking out the territory of being the very best with the Accord.
Yeah. And it's interesting, they've done a lot of, they're adding a lot of standard equipment on this thing. So for example, the Honda sensing package, with all the driver assist systems is going to be standard equipment on this car. So you get radar, adaptive cruise control, lane keeping system, collision mitigation, braking, blind spot monitoring, all that stuff standard on every single 2018 Accord.
Does that mean the base price goes up?
We don't know what the base price is going to be, but yeah, we can assume it's probably going to go up a bit compared to where it was.
Yeah.
But you get all that as standard equipment. Same as Toyota's doing the same thing on the new Camry as well. They're putting that full suite of adaptive driver assist systems, ADAS systems on every 2018 Camry. And I think it's just a matter of time before we see other manufacturers follow suit if they want to stay competitive in that segment. Another thing that's going to be standard on every 2018 Accord, adaptive damping system.
Is that standard on every single one, or just the higher?
Every single one, from the base model on up. Yeah. So you get a
see when you do it like that, it's not. Yeah. When you do it like that, it actually, like the adaptive dampers are probably a little bit more expensive, but overall, because all of them have it and the amount of cords they sell, that's a plus. Like
Yeah,
it's not that expensive.
350, 400,000 cars a year. All of a sudden, it starts to make sense to do something like that.
Yeah, and that way, so looking at it as a total perspective, like you don't have as many variations. If they all have the fancy suspension, then you don't have to spec and set up a whole other line of parts for the not fancy suspension. So
yeah, exactly,
may actually be cheaper.
Yeah,
which is an interesting way to look at it. So we touched on this too. The V6 is dead. Or not dead, but it's no longer offered in this car. I feel like that's going to fundamentally change the character of what a Honda's like to drive. There'll be torque, which is beneficial, but Honda for me always meant very smooth, rev happy 4-cylinder engines, and the V6 was the same sort of way. It was very smooth and it would like to rev and it was ballsy. I have no doubt that these engines are going to have that low end to mid-range torque that modern turbocharged engines, especially modern turbocharged 4s, do really well. But from behind the wheel, it's going to be a completely different experience.
Yeah, it certainly will. Not necessarily a bad experience. The 2-liter, the optional 2-liter engine in the Accord that replaces the V6. Keep in mind that's a slightly dialed back version of the engine that's in the Civic Type R. And somebody asked Jeff Conrad today, he's the senior VP for American Honda, whether this means that we might at some point see an Accord Type R, and he didn't say no, he didn't say yes, but he didn't rule it out either. He said, well, you never know. We'll see what happens.
I love it when they do that. I'm like, well, yeah. Maybe.
So, if the Civic Type R does well, which it seems to be doing so far, I wouldn't rule out the idea of an Accord Type R with, maybe, let's say, 325, 330 horsepower. That wouldn't be such a bad thing. It'd be worth giving up a V6 for that.
Yeah, I wouldn't kick it out of the driveway.
Yeah.
So, all right. So now we have this year, we've got a new Camry and we've got a new Accord. We've got a new Fusion coming on the way. In a couple of years.
The Fusion's probably still 2 years away. Given that they just launched a new police version of the Fusion Hybrid at the New York Auto Show, that's not coming out till early 2018. I'd say it's a safe bet that we're probably at least 2 more years away from a new Fusion. Yeah,
I've seen spy shots though, so I know they're working on it. But so where does the new Accord fit? With sort of the two titans of the class now have just been redone. How does it shake out?
It's going to be very interesting. The new Camry, has, completely different styling, much more aggressive styling than it's ever had before. It's built on their Toyota's new TNGA platform. It's going to be a very interesting race between these two. And, Nissan is probably going to launch a new Altima within the next 12 months as well. I would guess we'll probably see the new Altima maybe at the either at the LA Auto Show or the Detroit Auto Show in January. Because we saw a concept this year's Detroit Auto Show that 4-door sedan with Nissan's new styling direction that is almost the right about the exact same size you would expect of an Altima, and so that almost assuredly previews what we're going to see most likely at the Detroit show. So by this time next year, we'll have 3 brand new midsize sedans, and the top 3 sellers in this segment. All brand new, and I think it's going to be very interesting to watch. I don't know which one's going to win, and it's certainly possible that if these cars are good enough, it might start to draw back some of the consumers that have been jumping from cars into smaller and mid-sized crossovers, because the mid-sized sedan segment has been one of the hardest hit in terms of sales losses over the last couple of years.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's ever going to go away. I just think that the imagination of this market and global markets has been really captured by the crossover, for a variety of reasons. But we're always going to have mid-size sedans. There'll be some attrition just as the market for them does shrink, and it may come back, like you say. As of right now, it doesn't look like it's going to. But the fact that you can develop a really good midsize sedan, and because of their nature, crossovers basically share all that hardware. It's not really a big deal from an automaker perspective that people are buying one thing versus the other. It's just an adjustment for us that, one type of car is kind of falling by the wayside. But, minivans were everywhere and really hot 25 years ago, and now there's fewer choices, but they've kind of found this stasis. It's a steady market, and there's good product out there.
Yeah, it's not shrinking, and so it's not going away anytime soon. But there's definitely a market for them. Speaking of which, did you happen to catch Joanne Muller's little piece earlier this week about the Odyssey?
I didn't. I apologize. I have had a week. I mean, I had one person quit, and it was a good time.
She went on a road trip with her husband in an Odyssey last week, and it
wasn't the Disney one, was it?
No. But while she was driving, her husband was checking out the infotainment system, and one of the features they offer in the Odyssey is a streaming video package using the built-in 4G LTE connectivity that's in there. And one of the channels that's available on there was, I believe, Epix. And it turns out there was some content on there that was, let's just say, not family friendly.
Some blue content, shall we say?
Yes. So she let the folks at Honda know what her husband had found, and they quickly made some calls and had that turned off.
Really? I mean, I feel like you could probably spin that into another market offering.
Oh, absolutely. I mean,
that
could be a separate option package,
right.
Just like on your cable package, you order HBO and Showtime and Cinemax, you can order some extra content in your minivan.
You can get the Honda Odyssey Skinemax package. Anyway, moving on.
So that was a short-lived little controversy.
The fact that this is the 1950s, like we are in the 1950s future. It just looks different than it was imagined, right? We got cars that drive themselves. We got TV in our cars, and you got
cars that look like spaceships.
Yeah, that's and we're moving on to the Valkyrie at this point. In case anybody didn't pick up on that, this is like the embodiment of racing improves the breed. Like it looks just like a race car that they put some extra bodywork on to put it on the street.
Really any extra. Yeah.
It's a really fascinating experiment, and I have no illusions that we're going to see a lower market, lower end car come out like this. But for me, I'm not all that into supercars and hypercars or whatever kind of nonsense word we're going to make up for these things. But this one's really interesting because it's not the wretched excess. It's actually the lack of excess. It's like pure aerodynamic study. And it is really just essentially a race car that they turned into a street car. It's fascinating.
It's basically, in the Road and Track article, he refers to it as an LMP1 car. I'd say it's actually closer to a P2 because it doesn't have any kind of hybrid powertrain like the P1s do. But it is effectively a Le Mans prototype that's been made barely street legal. I mean,
the last time that happened was like, I'll go back. The cars that I think of that we had or have that came out of Le Mans racing are like the Cobra 60 years ago. Well,
I mean, there were a handful, in the 90s after the success of the McLaren F1 winning Le Mans outright in 1995. The GT class took off for a few years, and a bunch of manufacturers started getting crazier and crazier. Until things just got totally out of hand. You had the Mercedes CLR. They went through a couple of generations of the CLK GTR, and then finally the CLR.
XJ220, was that one of them?
That actually predated it. That one never raced at Le Mans, but there was the Porsche 911 GT1, and then the Toyota GT1. which really was just a P1 car, that was the only pretense to being a street car was one of the rules that Le Mans had at the time was that there had to be like 2 cubic feet of luggage space somewhere in the car. And, so on the Toyota GT1, they had like this little bin in the back, in the engine bay behind the engine that, it was so hot back there. You couldn't actually put any, store anything in that bin.
That's where you bake the pies.
Exactly. So there were some really crazy vehicles then. But at that time they only had to build, I believe it was, 1 or 2 road legal examples, in order to homologate it for Le Mans. This thing is not even intended to go racing, the Valkyrie. It's just nuts.
I think it's really cool. And so I strongly dislike stuff like the Bugatti Veyron and Chiron, just because they're these giant locomotives, and they're wretched excess.
Brute force.
Yeah.
Brute force approach to supercars.
And like, I have to say the engineering that's in all of these kind of cars is really, really interesting. But this one just sort of makes such a statement because it's so stripped down. It's got a huge aerodynamic tunnel in it in the middle, which it looks so wispy and fragile. And yet, Aston Martin says it's going to be road legal everywhere it's sold. I'm assuming that they're going to sell it in the U.S. market because there's people here with money that will buy it. I can't imagine what it would be like.
I don't know if this thing will meet U.S. safety requirements, like if it'll meet U.S. regs. I don't know if they are going to sell it here.
Well,
and they designed this thing in collaboration with the Red Bull F1 team.
So maybe it's just a publicity stunt.
Yeah, they're building a small batch of them. I'm not sure exactly how many they're planning to build. But yeah, it is effectively a publicity stunt. But every few years, recently, Aston Martin's been doing, something totally over the top. Like back, in the latter part of the previous decade, they did the 177, which they built 77 examples of.
Yeah.
And I think this one they're building maybe 50 of them. I'm not entirely sure what the total production run's going to be.
Like, it actually looks like it kind of would suck to drive, especially to actually try to drive it out on public roads. The cockpit, they say it'll hold people who are 6 foot plus, but it looks really tight, and the view out the windshield looks tight.
Yeah, if you look out the shot in the Road and Track article that we'll link to in the show notes, there's a photo looking out through the windshield, and the windshield is pretty small and has some pretty huge pillars. Like the carbon fiber frame around this thing is pretty massive. Visibility is basically non-existent out of this thing, except for a small slot straight ahead, which is actually
perfect for racing
to a Le Mans prototype.
Yeah, and they've got camera-based rear view mirrors, which all of it's again, it's really well done. It's nicely turned out because it's basically a race car ideas that they've dressed up with some of the typical Aston Martin sort of road car luxury. I do wonder what happens when this stuff does start to like. What are we going to see first in the next generation Camaro or Mustang? What are they going to pick up from this kind of stuff? Because that's what's going to happen is these supercar features are going to start to move down market once people continue to see them and they just get introduced that way. We're gonna see some of this stuff in regular cars eventually. I think. I don't know what it's going to be.
Yeah, I found it. They're building 150 Valkyries at $3.2 million a piece. And the camera based mirrors are one of the interesting features. Right now that's not legal in North America, and there's only a few places where it is legal. So they're going to have to get some dispensation on that one. But that is a feature that automakers would like to put in, because not having the mirrors hanging off the side of the car, those things generate a lot of drag. And so they would prefer to go to a camera-based system like this, with the displays inside the car.
I would prefer not to do that. I like the Honda Lane Watch system. I absolutely hate it.
Well,
hate it with fiery passion.
Lane Watch is not a great example of this. But actually, I think the idea of a camera-based system, rear view system, actually, I think it is a good idea. I mean, for one thing, you can guarantee that they're always going to be aimed correctly. Whereas most people don't aim their mirror. If they use their mirrors at all, they don't aim. A lot of people don't aim them properly.
Look, I mean, this is
seeing too much of their own car. And,
yeah. But see, we have the knowledge. We know that we have this specialized expertise. That's what makes us so awesome. And like back in the day, if you wanted to be a recording engineer, you used to have to know how to like align your tape machine and set up the bias and everything. And just, it was like specialized knowledge. Now you just like plug stuff into your computer. And I don't know, it makes me sad. And I feel like I'm now complaining like an old man about like how many rods to a hogshead a car will return and fuel economy. So forget it. We're going to see camera-based mirrors. And that's actually, I think you're right. That's probably one of the things that's going to come sooner rather than later, especially as fuel economy requirements ratchet up. It removes the drag. They're probably, they're probably, smaller, lighter, easier to package. The idea of a screen like playing back a constant video feed inside seems a little weird to me. Like it's just more light pollution in the cabin at night, and I like those things seem like practical matters that need to get solved before I will accept it without the burning hatred of 1,000 suns.
Well, I mean, there are still a lot of analog cars on the road that you can drive. But this I think this is something, and in fact, if there's one, from an automotive perspective, if there's one good thing that might come out of the current administration's total abhorrence of all regulations and their desire to repeal as many existing safety regulations as possible, I think one particular regulation that automakers would like to see repealed is the one that covers rearview mirrors. Because they do want to do this. And, so there is the potential to eliminate that regulation so that they can do stuff like this.
Of course they want to take the mirrors away. I don't know.
Yeah, but I mean, you drive on American roads, people don't use them anyway. So what's the difference?
That's true. And it makes every day like a race day.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Sure. So, yeah, and honestly, I think that's about all we have to say about the Valkyrie until we see more materialize with it.
Not that either one of us will probably ever get the opportunity to drive one, but
I think you may.
I don't know. I mean, there's only 150 of them that are going to be built.
But you do all those fancy things. I'm stuck out here at my Boston Outpost where I can just.
Hey, I still haven't driven the GT350 or a Ford GT, so.
Okay. Sometimes I guess I get lucky.
Yeah.
All right. Have we had any? I think we didn't put out the call for questions, but any feedback?
We did have one. There was a tweet a couple of days ago that somebody had a suggestion that every time you make a Ralph Nader reference, I should take a shot. And I think we'll just ignore that one.
Well, you'd be fine this week. I made no Ralph Nader references.
That's true. Let's see. Do we have any other messages or comments? I think that's about it. Yeah, that's about it. I did want to mention the upcoming Concours of America, Concours d'Elegance of America.
Oh, that's right. That looks super cool. Lots of really interesting cars that you don't necessarily associate with a Concours.
Right. So this is the show that used to be the Meadowbrook Concours d'Elegance. And about 6 or 7 years ago, they moved it from Meadowbrook Hall up in Auburn Hills or Rochester Hills, Michigan, to the Inn at St. John's in Plymouth, Michigan. And it's an amazing show. It's one of the top concours in North America, along with Amelia Island and Pebble Beach. And they always try to pick the organizers always try to set up a few unique classes every year. Like, for example, last year they had this amazing class of rally cars that included some just fabulous stuff, including several Group B cars in there. There was an MG Metro 6R4 and a Lancia Delta or a Delta S4 and an Integrale. So it was a lot of fun. This year, the organizers just had a media preview a couple of days ago here in Detroit, or in Plymouth more specifically, to talk about some of the classes this year. And they had a few of the cars that are going to be on display, including this amazing Ferrari Daytona Coupe, a 1973 Daytona Coupe. Just gorgeous. But one of the coolest classes that they're going to have this year is the Can-Am Challenge Cup class. And this is for cars that ran in the classic Can-Am series in the late 60s and early 70s, which is going to include one of the cars they had on display at the preview was a Shadow DN4 from 1974, which is the last year of the classic Can-Am series before they shifted over to Formula 5000. A couple of the other cars that are going to be on at the show this year, there's going to be a Porsche 91730, which is utterly dominated the Can-Am in 1973 in the hands of Mark Donohue, one of the fastest race cars ever built.
Was that the last? When did he die? He died in 75, I think. 74 or 75. So this was a year or two before he died. He died in 75 while testing a Penske Formula One car at the Nürburgring, I believe. Yeah, such a great loss.
Yeah, I know. He was an amazing driver, and he was able to run fast in anything that you put him in, which was one of the really phenomenal things in Indy cars, F1 cars, Can-Am, you name it.
Yeah, well, he could explain it too because he was an engineer. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, his crews loved to work with him because of his ability to really get into the nuts and bolts and tell them exactly what the car was doing, so they could tweak things and make it faster for him. Some of the other classes this year, there's a Cobra class, which is for 1960s era Shelby Cobras. There's a group of Rolls-Royce Silver Ghosts from the early part of the 20th century, very, very early Rolls-Royces. And of course, some hypercars. There's a group of hypercars that'll be on display. But if you're in the Southeast Michigan area, the weekend of July 29th, the last weekend of July, at the Inn at St. John's, the Concours is a fantastic show. Definitely worth a visit on that Sunday, especially if it's a nice sunny day like it was last year. I highly recommend it if you're in town. And then, the following weekend, also, if you're in the area, don't forget the Hespen Rally. You can sign up at hespenrally.com to the fundraiser for I can never remember the name of it's a form of bile duct cancer that claimed the life of the friend of many of us in this area, Patrick Hespen, way too early in his life. And we'll have a big group of people doing a road rally from Birmingham, Michigan down to Belle Isle with a lot of cool cars. So, whether you want to drive and participate or just come and watch, come check it out on that Sunday morning, August 6th.
Yeah, I have shamefully to admit that I have not been to any automotive stuff this summer, not even like a local cruise night. I wanted to make it out. Around here, we have the Lars Anderson Auto Museum, and they do a lot of lawn events every weekend. There's a theme, like this week it's Miata Day on Sunday. Last week, it was Microcar Day, and I missed it. I really wanted to go.
That would have been fun.
We went a few years ago, and there was just really, really neat stuff. Obviously, there's like Isettas and stuff, but there's like the Mokes were there.
These are Henry J's.
Yeah, I don't know when the last time I saw Henry J. Definitely the Bantams. Yeah, the Bantams, and then minis and stuff, and just such neat things. And that might have been the show that had a Nissan Figaro at it.
Yeah, I mean that's one of the cool things now. A lot of those. There was a lot of really cool Japanese market cars in the late '80s, early '90s that are now, because they're over 25 years old, they're legal to bring into the U.S. And you don't have to federalize them. You can basically bring them in essentially stock and register them here, and you can get some pretty good deals on some of those cars. I know a few people around here that have acquired some very interesting cars, like Chris Palkert, ex of Autoblog, and now at Roadshow, has a Nissan Figaro. Mike Austin has a Honda Beat, which was
the Honda Beat was really cool.
Yeah, a little 660cc mid-engine 2-seater. Kind of a micro NSX of its time. Yeah,
all those like wacky late 90s Japanese cars were just, I love the fact that we can bring them in now. And they're not anything other than styling exercises. The running gear is really common stuff. They're not exotic in any way, but you never see them here. So they do really stand out, and they're fun and cheap to run.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So, I will have to eventually this summer try to get up to some car things. I've done nothing.
You're a bad boy.
I'm just old. I've done just like whatever. I have used the lawnmower. I've done stuff with engines. There we go.
Yeah.
All right. So we haven't had much feedback this week. It's been quiet. Everybody's on summer vacation. And that I think the Accord and the Valkyrie are two ends of the spectrum. I think those were good news items to cover, but I think we've done a podcast. And certainly please go leave us feedback and let us know if you want us to yak about stuff. You want our unique perspective on things, because you want to hear Sam, who knows everything, talk about something from an informed perspective, or you want me to just complain like a cranky old man, or both. Either way, we can do that. This is podcast 31, Wheelbearings 31, and we'll be back soon for Wheelbearings 32.
All right, see you next time.
Owning a boat comes with a number of perks, like being able to say ahoy or land ho and not feel weird about it. So here's another perk. Geico's boat insurance offers access to the largest towing fleet on the water. And with specialist support from agents that are as passionate about boating as you are, there's so much value that you'll want to say, shiver me timbers, and not feel weird about that either. Get more with Geico.